Welcome to the Resilient Surgeon, part of the STS Surgical Hot Topics podcast. Our goal with the Resilient Surgeon series is to inspire our colleagues to be their best selves in and out of the operating room, using scientifically proven tools and recovery strategies of the world's top performers. I'm Dr. Michael Mattis, and in each episode, I will talk to game changers who will share evidence-based practices, real-world strategies, and their own personal stories and experiences to help you build your resilience and to help you be your best self no matter what. Our guest today on The Resilient Surgeon is Lori Baedeke, and the topic is leadership and connection. I first met Lori when she invited me to give a keynote to the medical staff at Creighton University, where, at the time, she was the director of healthcare leadership programs and the program director of the Executive MBA in Healthcare Management. What struck me most about Lori is her incredible commitment to physicians in general and her genuine understanding of our world, and her depth and wide-ranging knowledge and experience teaching leadership to physicians. My trip to Creighton cemented our friendship, and I'm delighted that she has agreed to be our guest on The Resilient Surgeon to talk about all things leadership. Lori has since moved on to an independent career as an executive coach, keynote speaker, and she has her own podcast now called The Growth Edge, which I encourage you all to listen to. Lori has authored 2 books, The Emerging Healthcare Leader, a Field Guide, and her most recent book, Mentor, Coach, and Lead to Peak Professional Performance. And now I bring you Lori Baedeke. Lori, welcome to The Resilient Surgeon. It's a real honor and a privilege to have you here.
Dr. Mattis, it is such a treat to be back with you again and to have this conversation. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, great. It's so nice to see you again. And, for those in the audience, obviously they don't know us, but, I was honored to be able to speak at your institution at Creighton when you were still working with Creighton. And that's how we got to know each other. And we've had a nice and enriching relationship ever since. So it's great to have you here.
Indeed. Well, I'm a huge fan. I don't know how much of your listenership on this show is non-thoracic surgeons, but I am among them, and I listen loyally and enjoy it immensely.
Great, thanks. Well, so you're a leadership expert. I would say that you're a leadership expert, and so much of your career has been about leadership from almost age 22, when you first took an assignment at a hospital, a major leadership position. And, there's a lot to the leadership world and things that one needs to kind of understand and know, and skills. And today I'd like to focus on the issue of connection with others as a crucial leadership skill, not only a skill, but a life enhancing thing. And so just as by way of preamble, just to set the stage, my perspective as a cardiothoracic surgeon and what I'm hearing, and I know that the people that I work with coaching and others, friends, they're experiencing a lot of the sense of being a cog in a wheel of the machine of healthcare.
Yeah.
And, that's happening more and more. And my hypothesis or thesis is that one of the only ways that we as a society or a group can counter this sense of alienation is by banding together and creating a strong sense of belonging and connection with each other.
Yep.
And so that's my general thesis. But the thing that kind of tends to work against that is, of course, the prolonged training. And, so somebody goes into medical school, they're hyper focused on themselves and graduating from medical school and doing well. Then to residency. And now we're talking about 7, 8, 9, 10 years of all of that, focused on developing your surgical skills, your clinical skills, maybe research work. And again, the focus is primarily on you as an individual, gaining those skills, becoming adequate or sufficient, not just sufficient, but excellent at those things. And then we go into an early career, and once again, we're back in I got to drive my car as hard as I can, start doing the research, the education, the clinical stuff, whether you're in private or academic practice. And the focus tends to be still on ourselves. And in the mix of all of that time, so many years, it's just in general not taught how to lead. not, and I'm not talking about just from a title position, which of course is one, but leading everyday leadership, which is something we all need to do. And and these things translate, in my opinion, directly to the family and our personal lives. All right. And so again, there's a lot that we can talk about in the leadership realm, but I wanted to bring this back to if you were, and of course you've run programs, cohort programs for residents in training around leadership, but focusing on the leadership, on the connection piece, what would you, because I know, and the literature supports the fact that a sense of belonging and connection is the glue that makes one able to influence people and help move them in the direction that you want them to move in. And I just gave grand rounds at the University of Colorado, and my focus of that talk was about seeing and believing in people. And I used really dramatic examples from my own personal life with my son Sam, and then I'm going to wrap up my dialogue here. I talked about a wonderful book called It's Your Ship by Micah Brashoff. And that was such a remarkable thing because in 2 years, he took a ship that was one of the worst performing ships in the Pacific Fleet and turned it around into the best performing ship in the Pacific Fleet. But here's the astounding thing. He interviewed all 310 sailors individually and asked them questions about what were their goals in life, what do they want out of the Navy. Now, I've been in the Navy. I was a decade, which means I chip paint stuff. And I can't imagine, nobody ever asked me anything. This is what you're going to do. Go do this. And that little piece of activity that he did, he knew every sailor's name. So when he walked around, he knew their names. He understood what they were interested in. Well, the retention rate or the reenlistment rate went from 28% to this staggering 95%. I mean, imagine 95% of the sailors reenlisting. And that's all by the force of feeling that they're part of something, that they're valued. And so with that as a backdrop, I'd like to explore with you how would you help people deal with this issue? How would you help them learn how to connect and lead through connection and influence? So that's a long-winded introduction, but I just wanted to really set the stage for this.
Yeah, I think that sets the table really beautifully for a multifaceted topic, which is connection, which is so deeply connected to the literature around well-being and the connection or the literature around belonging, and is also supremely important as we think about being able to lead and nurture, sustain environments that are inclusive and
Yes.
are welcoming for individuals of a variety of different identities, which is a topic in and of itself. Every single one of the topics I think we're going to touch on today have offshoots that we could and may find ourselves rabbit tailing down. But I'll start with the fact that you just mentioned the word influence. At the very end, you used that word and you hadn't used it yet. And it's one that I want to linger on for a moment within this topic, because when we think about the importance of connection, so much of leadership is about connection and being able to influence through others the things that we can't do on our own. And for so many of your listeners who are trained or are training to be surgeons, so much of your work is, in fact, an individual contribution. While you are a part of a collaborative team in the operative suite, you are usually the end-all be-all for that. And as such, you're trained to be individually competent and credible and capable, and also sufficient. But so much of leadership is about influence. And if you're starting to lead, perhaps as a chief resident, for example, and now in addition to your own training and formation and development, you're giving feedback on, or you're in charge of, the development of your residents within your department or program. Or perhaps you're advocating for some of the resources that you need, or you're coordinating the schedule in that small step up, or in that next career step where perhaps someone is serving as a section chief or, a medical director or an APD or a PD or a program chair, or then outside of the academic environment, aspiring to be a chief medical officer or any of those other leadership roles, you have to realize that your ability to then connect with and influence outcomes through and alongside others is a very complex and nuanced process that we need to consider. What does this look like? And if it's not just about what I can contribute, but instead about what we can contribute, it really requires then that we start to consider things that are outside of our own purview. And so I know that you're a big fan of Dr. Marshall Goldsmith. You and I share an affinity for his work. He is superb. Highly recommend his writings, but one of his excellent books is What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And so, spoiler alert, the exhausting reality is that being a superb and well-trained surgeon is insufficient for success in leadership, because of course that is what will get you in the door, but so much of what will set you apart are skills and competencies that are outside of the realm of what you've been trained on through your academic journey to date. And I think one of the ways that we master those and acquire those skills is in community. We sit at the feet of the masters, the mentors who can share their lessons learned and lived experience. We seek out mentors or coaches or sponsors or colleagues who can come alongside us and perhaps coalesce to advocate for some of the change that's needed inside our institutions, outside our institutions, etc. And so I'll pause and ask for you to reflect on or aim me toward the next destination that you'd like our conversation to aim toward.
So that's fantastic. And, I just want to highlight the what got you here won't get you there issue. And I can just relate some personal stories and, what I would consider to be failures on my part. And I was when I was at the University of Minnesota, I was very intense, let's put it like that, about getting my programs done. So I had a rotations as a course program, I had a leadership program that I created, and I constantly ran up against so if I had this rotations as a course idea, I would go, as a program director, I went and met with all the people that were on the rotations, the people that were running the rotations. And I had this idea. And if I didn't understand why they couldn't see the merit of it, because the 80-hour work week had just come in. And all of a sudden we're being pressurized to do more education, quote, a shorter time. And I had a solution to that. But I was of the mindset that, what don't you see about this? We need to do this. Okay. And that's a perfect example of what got me here won't get me there, because I met enormous resistance. And that was a pattern that I adhered to, because it seemed to work for me to get me where I wanted to go, pushing and clawing and doing, really working hard. But I hit the wall there, and that was true of so many things. And I think that ability to influence there is what I was lacking. I didn't understand the nuances, hearing what their ideas were, listening to them, all these things. So I'd like you to reflect on what are the exact things one does to do this sort of thing. And then you mentioned headwinds earlier before we started the recording. And I think that there's an enormous amount of problems or headwinds that are, as you said, that are pushing us away from each other. So let's just talk about some of those things, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so I'll start with just that kind of ability to influence. And this topic comes up so frequently in my coaching practice. The majority of my clients are physician executives, they're department chairs, they are CMOs, they are other executives who are perhaps newer to those roles, or really just find themselves fairly isolated in that they can't just be candid and vulnerable and very transparent with some of the challenges that they're up against, and having a thought partner that helps them to strategize some of the ways that they'll approach some of those internal or external headwinds. And so very often, in terms of being able to learn one's own influence, it really is one part, a mechanism of their own self-awareness and understanding their unique leadership style, and then the confidence to leverage that to, of course, appropriately regulate it so that we, know how to read our audience and know the room and know who wants us to just let it rip and be the intensity that we bring to the table. And I think you and I share that very, very much. I remember my son, who's now in college, when he was in his kind of middle school, adolescent days, he would say all the time, "Mom, you're a lot." And, one of my pinned tweet says, "You will be too much for some people. Those are not your people." I mean, when you bring just high intensity, high octane, fully caffeinated, and then some energy and presence, you need to know who wants you to let that rip and who do you need to really rein that back in, self-regulating, using your emotional intelligence to understand how to not overwhelm other individuals or an audience. And so learning that about yourself, having a coach or a mentor give you good feedback, and then brainstorm or pregame some of those conversations, the ways to deliver certain messages, the ways to create certain messages so that they allow you to earn some of the influence. One of those messages is that, we often think short-sightedly that saying something once will in fact get the message across. But it's rarely like that. We have to communicate and re-communicate and then back up and try a different approach. And so many of the conversations of influence, if we're advocating for resources, if we are making sure that we are letting ourselves be perceived for what we bring today, but the future potential that we have as well. It's about strategically communicating. And sometimes it's the meetings before the meetings. It's the meetings after the meetings. It's the way that I literally over the weekend, I was just exchanging an email with one of my surgeon clients who's a department chair. We'd had a coaching call last week and we'd been talking about a specific communication that he needed to send. He drafted it. He sent it to me over the weekend, said, "Hey, can you redline this for me? Does this hit some of the things that we were talking about?" And then one additional suggestion that I offered was, I'm suggesting you send this message, but it's a little bit longer than your recipient had said that they preferred this message be. So there are reasons why, and you've outlined that, but maybe preface that email with a quick text that says, "Hey, so-and-so, you're going to see a message in your inbox shortly. It's longer than you requested, and here's why. We're going to be able to get to that point down the line. But for now, a little bit of additional context building. Thanks so much for your understanding of why this message isn't exactly hitting that target that you set," right? And so now you're just kind of trying a multifaceted approach. You're getting some coaching on how it is that you garner their influence. You don't want to shut down. This is a key center of influence that message is going to. And if it's not precisely how that individual's asked it to be delivered, there's a legitimate reason why. And now you're just kind of finessing that communication. That's about influence. And so sometimes as we're thinking about how we navigate complex, nuanced relationships or institutions, and the importance of really strategic communication skills, those are all interconnected. Pausing again for your direction.
Oh, no, that's I love the email example because it, and again, it reminds me of myself and many of my colleagues. As surgeons, we're taught to be quite direct and, it's like facts, let's just do this. Let's just do
Yep.
this. But that's not how everybody operates. I mean, one of the reasons I love surgeons is because I can walk up and say, what are we doing? We need to do this. But as I just articulated, that doesn't even go well, with my surgeon colleagues if I have a bigger proposal, something I want to get done. But the level of effort required to influence, it feels daunting. But, I'd like you to talk a little bit about the influence, because I really believe that you have to see people. So for instance, when I say see people, that example with the email, everything you outline there is being hyper thoughtful about that individual's position, what potential pressures they're experiencing, what's their life about, all that stuff. And depending upon how you approach that, you can really damage it and damage it for a good while, or you can create a a colleague. And
Yes.
so how do you go about seeing people and keeping that in mind? Because I think that's a central principle of all this. And everybody you're dealing with, they are human beings.
Yep.
They have emotions. And as much as in the past, I would have liked to have denied the emotional issues, which I now embrace. These are realities and we have to attend to those, and people are different personality. So it's a wild, wild west out there in a sense, in terms of people and interacting with them.
It really, really is. But, the beautiful news as well is that there are so many people who are eager to and well equipped to help you, to help us.
Yes,
And
I
so
agree.
I think we need to first and foremost get out of our own way
Mhm.
and adopt a mindset of curiosity and humble inquiry that says,
Curiosity, yes.
what do I need to learn and who could I learn from? This requires that we tamp down one of the headwinds that blows inside of us and that you've written about and spoken about, and that is our tendency towards self-sufficiency. And self-sufficiency is a skill, it's an attribute that serves us well until it doesn't, right?
Like
As
everything.
as you've written. And I love that so much. And I love sharing your brilliant article. But self-sufficiency is something that we have to regulate for ourselves. And unless we are confident at whatever stage or season or station that we reside, that we have all the answers and we are perfectly sufficient, then the call to action is who has some answers, who has some knowledge, who has some wisdom and insight, and should I go get it? And the great news is that if we take that approach to say, I am going to network, that's a word that the MBAs and the business school folks use far more than the medical school folks do, but we're curating our circle. We're carefully selecting relationships and conversations and connections that can be formative to us. And I will tell you with so much confidence, and my rearview mirror is littered with examples of just making bold reaches and asks to people to say, hey, could I pick your brain? Hey, I loved this article. Hey, I heard you on this podcast. Hey, I admire you from a distance. I love everything that you tweet about or post about. I heard so-and-so say your name. They suggested I reach out to you. And if we are doing that with grace and with the type of clarity that says, hey, Mike Mattis, I read your article. I loved it. Could I pick your brain? Could I invite you to come lecture? Could I, get on your calendar for a 30-minute Zoom conversation in the next 30 to 60 or 60 to 90 days? If you're clear and your ask is light enough and you're giving enough runway, I can say with confidence, you can get on almost anyone's calendar. Because if any of us think about if we were the recipient of that and someone wanted to pick our brain, and unless we were legitimately beyond bandwidth, and this was someone we did not want to help, people are very generous with their time. And again, also, if we can, if people reach out to me and ask me those questions, if I can tuck it into some drive time or some airport time or some other downtime, or if it is something I want to prioritize really focus time for, absolutely. So connection is tamping down that tendency towards self-sufficiency and that ego or hubris that says, don't ask, they'll see you as an idiot. Go ahead and just raise the flag that says, I have something to learn. I think you could be a great teacher to me. What would you like to impart? Because the answers to the questions that we need to acquire exist within other people, beautiful human beings who love to be helpers. We don't like to ask for help as much as we love to help. And it's a little bit paradoxical because we don't ask those questions because we don't want to be a burden. But there is this kind of paradoxical, beautiful reality that when we're able to be of help to someone else, it gives us the oxygen or the dopamine fix that gets us through a lot of the rest of what we need to mop up on any given day.
Yeah, that's for sure. Now so you're talking about mentorship and learning from others. And so one of the challenges I think that our world has is that it's an echo chamber. We, out of just sheer reality, we're around surgeons almost all the time, you know?
Mhm.
And so that's our group. And there's a lot to learn from disparate fields and others in other fields. And I think what you're saying is incredibly important. And I would encourage anybody that's early in their leadership, early in their training or in any leadership position. And again, I don't really distinguish leadership in terms of position versus daily leadership. It's all the same thing in my book. Of course, there are issues that are much more dramatic if you're in a position, but the process is still the same. So I forgot where I was going with that, about reaching out to others and learning from them. I think that was probably the end of what I was talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
But what about the curiosity in terms of seeing other people? So that person that you're writing the email to that you mentioned. I mean, I've found that one of the ways to shut down what I want to say when I'm having a conversation with somebody is to get curious about them.
Yeah,
And boy, people love it when you're interested in them, you know?
absolutely.
You know, and so I think this is such a crucial and important leadership skill, you know, to do that.
I agree. And there is so much value from both sitting at the feet of folks that have diverse paths to our own.
Yes.
Especially, I talk to so many colleagues who are either at or approaching key career pivots, and they're feeling like, where the heck am I going to find the answer? If they've lived in a silo, if they've lived in an echo chamber, especially for your colleagues in academic surgery, that
Mhm.
demands so much hyper focus, and you have to put on the blinders and you have to be so contained that you do find yourself in some fairly narrow circles. And getting outside of that can feel very daunting. It can feel
Mhm.
really, really intimidating, because where you have carved a lot of notoriety, perhaps, if you start to, swim outside of that space, it can feel very intimidating. But those growth edges, that tension, is exactly where the most meaningful progress can occur. And if you're feeling yourself approaching a career pivot or starting to yearn for something, you're kind of hungry for
Mhm.
something different, you have to explore a little bit and get curious and get a little bit courageous, so that you can give yourself some of those perspectives that will help you to understand what else might exist, or, what are the options or opportunities that exist for me. And so, just in fact, being curious to learn from other people's journeys, thinking about who are the luminaries, who are the folks that are either just sunsetting their careers or have accomplished so much. Sorry, my dog got up and is starting to yawn. Who are
That's so
those
sleepy.
folks? Who are those folks whose wisdom you would love to sit and extract? And again, I can tell you with a lot of confidence, they would probably very likely be generous with their time and their share to you. So it's just about being strategic and considering, who is it? And again, I just was challenging a surgeon colleague a couple of weeks ago on a call to say, if you fill your pipeline of 2025 with monthly calls by the end of that year, and if you're constantly 2 to 3 months out filling that pipeline, you will have curated a bouquet, a semblance, a buffet of,
Mhm. Mhm.
tastings or beauty that will have informed you and will then form you in a way that gives you maybe an off ramp or an option for what comes next for you.
Which can open up paths you never would have even expected. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if we don't initiate in that way, if we don't leverage that type of curiosity and the courage, then we'll probably find ourselves only seeing the options that exist in that particular lane. And this is even more so important for, your listeners who are women in surgery, your colleagues who are, individuals of color for whom the world might not actively seek them out or
Yes.
immediately at
Yes.
face value
Yeah.
see them as that capacity and potential that they have. And so it will require even more courage and even more initiative and even more sponsorship and allyship to have put individuals around them who can, in fact, see the potential that they have and then open doors and also stand by their side or have their back as they are traversing through those chapters, because the journey is not perfectly equal for everyone who makes it.
No, it's not. Yeah. Well, this triggers a thought in my mind, and that is the issue of authenticity. And Herminia Ibarra writes about, being playful with ourselves.
Yeah.
And one of the challenges that comes up frequently is, well, that's just not who I am. I'm not like that. I don't connect well with others, or I don't like to talk too much, whatever the line is. And what are your thoughts on this idea of authenticity and being who you are in any given moment in time?
I love that topic, and I love Dr. Ibarra's writings and her research. I think that it's important that we seek out the types of environments where we have that safety, the psychological safety and the security to be able to have that type of connection where that exists. And while I've never been a part of one of your coaching groups, as I have heard you speak of them over the years, and as I've imagined what must happen, it is a high level of transparency and vulnerability and psychological safety that lets your clients, individuals, come to a place where they can let down their armor, where they can shed the facades of the personas that they have to take into the world. And we all have that reality. So finding those environments and seeking out the types of communities or spaces where we can, in fact, be safe and be playful, because, neuroscience tells us that that is where our brains will unlock the greatest creativity and the greatest insight then and connection to be able to either solve the problem that we're dealing with in the moment or consider next chapters or facets of our journey.
See, there you just hit on what I think, and it could easily fly under the radar here. And that is that what I call collective human intelligence. When you bring people together, instead of siloed surgeons running their own career and worrying about themselves, but if you bring people together in the very environment you just articulated, magic happens. Magic. It's really, truly magic. The collective intelligence surfaces. And that is exactly what happened on that ship. I mean, the changes in that ship and the success of that ship was due to collective human intelligence and his ability to wrangle everybody together and feel like they were part of something and that they were safe with him as a leader. Yeah.
Indeed. And, I think that brings up something that's important to consider here also. And when we go back to some of those headwinds that we were considering early on, one of the most substantial headwinds that pushes against us or any of your listeners who are busy surgeons with very, very demanding careers and full plates in their personal lives as well, the bandwidth or the capacity to make time for connection, to make time for relationships, to make time for these environments where we can come wholly present either to a one-on-one mentoring or coaching conversation or to the type of nurtured environment where that could exist, seems unrealistic, seems luxurious, seems pie in the sky.
The pressure
and
now is overwhelming,
without a doubt,
Yeah.
we have no bandwidth for that. And then you layer on top of it the reality that for many of us, present company included, not you, but me, totally an introvert, totally a homebody, right?
You?
And complete homebody, Mike.
It's
And
hard for me to buy this.
everyone says that time and again, but I am such an introvert. And I love to curate meaningful, deep, rich, go real fast relationships on a one-on-one. but like you toss me in that cattle call cocktail reception at a conference, or you know, tell me to go make small talk, and
Doesn't work.
no, absolutely hard pass. But here's the interesting thing. You know, the literature tells us that approximately 65% of professionals in a STEM field, so medicine and surgery, 2/3 of you identify as introverted leaning. And so you couple both the overwhelming workload and lack of bandwidth with a strong propensity to need to recharge in solitude and not have any more energy for peopling at the end of a given day or week, then you have kind of a double whammy, a double
Yeah, for
headwind
sure, for
pushing
sure.
against you in terms of, could I even imagine? I speak on the practices of networking at a variety of different CME courses and healthcare conferences. And as I identify myself as an introvert, I put a picture of 4 quarters on my slide. And I say, you know, 4 quarters and 100 pennies both equal $1. And so for those of you who are introverted like me, introverted leaning like me, you're going to need to identify quality over quantity as it pertains to the peopling that you do. Be very
Mhm,
judicious and
mhm,
strategic with the
mhm.
relationships that you seek out and maintain. And it's really funny. Last fall, I was giving this talk at a CME course in Chicago, and someone came up to me after and said, Lori, I see your 4 quarters and I'll raise you. I'm a little bit more of a $2 gal myself.
Yeah,
And so I offer that to the listener really because we have to acknowledge that we will feel so much inertia or momentum against going ahead and reaching out and having those connections. But so much is being written right now, and our US Surgeon General is writing frequently
Yes,
on
yes.
the prevalence of emotional loneliness and social isolation and its prevalence in high achieving professionals. And really one of the most, you know, terrifying categories is, you know, 40 and 50 something high professional males who, you know, we can't overlook the importance of connection, social relationships in our formation as individuals, and finding the ways to have real, authentic, meaningful reactions and relationships with people who know us well, but also who won't take our answer of fine if we're asked, how are you? And
Yeah,
someone
fine.
knows us well enough to know otherwise and says, bullshit,
Yeah.
sit down,
It's-
let's
yeah,
talk.
yeah, yeah. And that's what I think is needed among our divisions and departments. We need that kind of cohesive belonging and care of each other because the outside world in the healthcare organization is not going to do it. And that this is again this is a hobby horse of mine to really do as much as I can to bring awareness about this crucial elephant in the room, in my opinion. Because I remember when I was 55, I was like desperately lonely, you know, at times. I mean, I felt so isolated. A lot of it by virtue of the surgical habits and self-sufficiency, you know, just all part of the mix. But you know, one thing you hit on was this extroversion, introversion. That's a perfect example of this notion of feeling authentic. Brian Little, the world famous researcher and expert on the big five personality and personality tests, you know, he talks about what we call personal projects, and that's where we step outside our normal tendencies. You know, like my extroversion percentile was 98th percentile, right? I mean, it's just like off the charts. But I wasn't one of those people who wanted to go to cocktail parties.
Yeah.
I like to interact with a lot of people and have conversations. I don't mind. I can do that almost all day long. But then when I left clinical practice and I found myself at home a lot alone, it was really difficult at first, but it cultivated the skill in me of being alone, which I was never really comfortable with, and the ability to be bored. And, you know, that led to a lot, you know, that ability to be bored and really think about, you know, what it is that I'm about, who am I, what do I want in life? And the point is, even as an introvert, he's deeply introverted, but the personal project that was so important to him was being able to really teach well. And he became one of the best lecturers at Harvard, and he was voted that way. And so, but he would be so exhausted by it, but he had to go in the bathroom afterwards and sit in the toilet just to recover. Literally,
Yep.
this is in his TED talk. But the point is, as somebody that's transitioning into leadership positions or leading in any environment, and this is true again with family, we can step outside our comfort zone. And the thing is, it feels unfamiliar. This is why it feels inauthentic. It's just not familiar yet. And once you do it enough, it becomes familiar. And I really want people to understand that they can do these things and grow their neurologic wiring and make it happen and develop the skills to become a connected leader.
Absolutely. And I think one of the most important reminders is also that it's very natural when we start to feel like, either we're feeling stuck or we feel like we don't have the answers or solutions. And then we think, I'm broken, I'm dysfunctional, I'm the only one. And when we are in community with others, we start to see behind the curtain. And the truth is that everyone has insecurities. Everyone is fallible. Everyone has failed or stumbled or fumbled or suffered a social or political gaffe in their ascent in leadership. And especially as you move outside of those known domains, and you are in fact growing in your purview to lead a team or lead a department or interface more consistently with administrative or executive leadership or trying to pioneer in new spaces and advocate. All of those things bring the unknown, and it is unrealistic that we would have mastery yet. But our ego tells us, it whispers insidiously in our ear, you're broken, hide it, mask it. And then what does that result in? Massive maladaptive behaviors or cognitive distortions. And what is the antidote? It's community, it's connection, it's conversation with other credible and competent and capable leaders who will say, yes, my friend, I've been there and I've failed too. Don't worry, you're not alone. Unless you repeat these behaviors time and again, they do not have to be your identity. Here is the path, here is the way. And so when we're feeling the pressure to socially isolate, to retreat, to let shame, consume us, that's when we most need to reach out for the hand of someone else and to overcome that sense of self-sufficiency and shame that will keep us from the type of community and connection and conversation that will in fact heal us or
help us blossom.
us.
And
Help
heal
us blossom. Yes.
Yeah, no doubt. And that what you're talking about is somebody that not only understands the struggles, because you're right, we are all the same. We are fundamentally, we're not the same, but we are, and we all struggle and deal with all sorts of stuff. And but it's about believing, having somebody that believes in you, and that gets back to my grand rounds, because you're talking about the very things I talked about, and that's seeing and believing in people. And that is like the battery that can get people moving forward when you feel like you're seen and seen as a human being with some value. And then people believe in your ability to whatever it is, do whatever it is.
Yeah.
And maybe the perfect way to wrap up this conversation is just talk about love. Because, I could never have even brought that idea up in the past when I was a surgeon, this idea of love. But, Alan Mulally, the former CEO of Ford, who turned that company around from 17 billion loss in 1 year to not taking a government handout and becoming profitable, his first leadership principle is love your people up. People first, love them up.
Yep.
And the way I feel people can love people up is by seeing and believing in them,
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts about love in this world? I'm not talking about amorous love, obviously. I'm talking about love of each other as human beings,
Yes. Yes. And I think that is such an important topic. You and I have chatted about this offline on a couple of occasions, and I just, I appreciate that so much, because that first and foremost, to be in touch with the things that we most deeply love as individuals is one of the clues to how we will understand our purpose and our why, and have an ability to, if we don't have full autonomy or agency in any of our roles, and that is decreasing so significantly
So
for
significantly.
everyone,
Yes.
who's in the healthcare profession. And I have yet to meet anyone at any level in any profession or discipline who has complete autonomy. It's just not realistic. And so what agency or autonomy that we do have, if we know what our purpose or passion is, if we know what our deepest love or affinity is, and if then we have even the smallest or slightest amount of agency to give ourselves somewhat more incremental adjacency to that, we can in fact sustain ourselves. And so from the perspective of the introspection and reflection to get to know ourselves and know what we genuinely, truly love as humans is so important.
I couldn't agree more. And, this was when I started out on this road, when I left clinical practice, I really didn't even know myself. I mean, and this I think happens to so many of my colleagues. You go into medical school, you're consumed, and basically you're consumed with the project for, that medical school 4 years, residency 7 to 10, and then early career. And you're so busy pounding and moving. Do you ever have the time to actually downtime to really think about yourself and learn, what is it you really love in life? You end up doing all these things and saying yes to so many things, and so much of it may not be part of what the stuff that you talk about that you love, but to find those core areas that you really do love doing and then nurture them to the best of your ability, I think is just foundational for our mental health.
It is. And I know that you and I both appreciate the writings of Marcus Buckingham, and he writes about the things that we love. He writes about that red thread of what it is that makes us our weird self. But I think that understanding those things about ourselves and really giving ourselves permission to understand that so that we can bring it more fully or consistently to the world is incredibly important. But then also from the relational perspective, it really is finding and seeking out our tribe, our people. And if we don't have it in our current environment, and unfortunately, fewer and fewer of us actually have a fantastic leader who really, in fact, is, the leader that we need, or perhaps the department or the institution where we're thriving. Maybe we are just barely surviving. And if that's your reality inside your institution, it is imperative that you make the effort to seek out the type of connection and community with individuals, perhaps in your professional society, or perhaps in your community, or perhaps in an online group, in some way, putting yourself in connection and adjacency to relationships where you can actually be your authentic self, where you are, in fact, loved and accepted and find the belonging that sustains you. And if you are, in fact, in a circumstance where you do have true support and celebration and belonging, count your blessings and
Yeah, no kidding. That
be
is
very
for sure.
mindful and grateful
Yeah.
for that, because it is a rarity. And
is
the
a rarity.
absence of it is incredibly intolerable. And the presence of it is not something that should be taken for granted.
No, that's for sure. And I only know of a couple of people, honestly, where I think that kind of tribe or family sense is really present. I mean, it's so rare. I think it's
Indeed.
so rare,
Indeed.
which is a tragedy.
Yeah.
Well, Lori, thank you so much for joining us on the Resilient Surgeon. And you've got a lot to offer. So where can people reach you? How can they, what services do you have? I mean, you do a lot of coaching, speaking. So just tell us where we can find you and avail ourselves of your wisdom.
Yeah, thank you. Well, my website is a great place, just loribedke.com. And I'm guessing that you'll put a link in the show notes to it. But I'm very active on LinkedIn. Used to be very active on Twitter, but that place is not what it used to be, unfortunately. On my website, you can find my podcast where you, Dr. Mattis, have been a guest twice. It's called The Growth Edge, and I post episodes on a weekly basis on topics surrounding personal and professional development. I've got some digital courses on the topics that I frequently speak or teach on, and do have kind of a selective executive coaching practice as well. So if anyone's wanting to be in touch, please don't hesitate to reach out. Despite my claimed introversion, I do in fact cherish one-on-one relationships very deeply. And I cherish the opportunity to have been a part of this conversation today. Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. Again, it was an honor. Thanks so much, Lori.
This has been The Resilient Surgeon, a podcast brought to you by the Society of Thoracic Surgeons. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this podcast, please rate it 5 stars and let your friends, trainees, and colleagues know about it. On social media, you can use the hashtag #BeYourBestSelf. More information about the Society of Thoracic Surgeons is available online at sts.org.